Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on bandwidth, mastering the hybrid connectivity in retail. What I'd like to do today is take you through some of the background in how retail is digitizing and what it really means to be the best in class for retailers, and then also take you through some of the technologies that would be required to automate that. So what we're seeing with retailers is that the leading ones, the ones that are really redefining the space and gaining a competitive advantage, are three times more likely to, or three times better at generating shareholder value. And this is being done through a couple of different processes. One is automating all of the, let's say, the backstage fulfillment, order taking processes, but also digitizing the processes in the stores and the way that employees work. And this results in a higher degree of engagement for them and also productivity. And when employees feel productive, they're much less likely to change employers. And that's always been a big problem in retail in terms of the highest churn rate of employees in the US. Then you look on the technology side, when you really embrace the cloud and you tune it up and get the performance out of that, and you start to be able to use SaaS-oriented retail applications for mobile devices and PCs throughout the stores, distribution centers, and you really optimize the usage of edge compute and devices, you can increase the efficiency of your operations dramatically. And you can also lower your inventory costs. So there's some real benefits on both the cost saving side, and there's also benefits on the revenue generation side where you're fulfilling orders better, you're helping customers become more loyal to you. The problem with digital retail itself is that it's becoming an extremely complex infrastructure. And when you look at all the different pieces of a digital retail store today, it's the mix of point of sale terminals that are connected to the cloud, payment processing systems, a lot of virtual desktops, and then there's obviously essential telephony, unified communications between staff and customers, inventory systems and e-commerce backends and in-store advertising. And a lot of this technology is dependent on a couple of things. One is connectivity to the cloud, and the other one is very high quality Wi-Fi. For both the customers as well, and more importantly, the employees in the store who are using mobile devices to fulfill orders and their jobs. The performance is really a function of making sure that SaaS and cloud performance, cloud hosted applications, private ones you would use in your retail operations, are running at peak performance, but also on making sure that there's a very low latency and connectivity to those different hosts that are providing those applications in a retail operations environment. The thing is, with retail, it's very fast feedback. So if people are realizing like that the orders are not being fulfilled for online delivery on time, or if they're trying to get a coupon code using an Apple in the store and they can't do that because the Wi-Fi is not working, or if the store shelves are not stocked with their favorite brands on time when they go shopping, that's the kind of thing that really impacts the Net Promoter Score and people's loyalty to the brand. So it's important, of course, that digital retail has the performance it needs to make sure that these customers are loyal and keep coming back. In terms of the challenges from a technology stack, it's important, of course, low latency store connectivity, in-store Wi-Fi. We talked about dependable unified communications, a responsive digital experience for the staff itself, and then the ability to secure the stores as well to the headquarters, to people who might be remotely working, as well as distribution centers. In terms of being able to achieve those different challenges, it's getting more complex because the traditional tools that people use to monitor infrastructure, network performance, and so on are really not ideally integrated in a way to see things across the end-to-end infrastructure. And because things are moving to the cloud and SaaS and mobile, it's becoming much more difficult for traditional monitoring solutions in the APM or NPM space to be able to see into those different areas. So you look at this kind of new world that is enabling the digital transformation of retail, and it means you have to get a new level of visibility across all of these different use cases so you can pinpoint very quickly where problems come from. One thing we've also seen working with a lot of retailers is that whereas in the past you might have been connecting stores with an MPLS or a private link, those are extremely expensive. And then a lot of retailers have moved into just pure internet access with firewalls and VPNs. And that is already an advance in terms of being able to get a higher bandwidth connectivity into the stores. But in reality, it doesn't solve the problems for performance because we know that VPNs are particularly difficult to manage, and internet, if it's only based on one provider, can be quite fragile. So we're seeing this quite a strong shift to what we would call dual tunneling methodology of connecting stores and sites together, which relies on direct internet access to SASE application and SASE connectivity, I should say, for security, things like CASB solutions, like Zscaler, Netscope, iBoss, to be able to connect people very quickly with low latency to cloud and SaaS applications, complemented by an SD-WAN that would allow the stores and the users to access private applications hosted in the cloud. So it gives a different security profile. It gives a more of a private network connectivity. But this dual tunneling means that there's a more complex network to monitor. And then if you use the tools, for example, that are built into an SD-WAN solution or in, let's say, a secure gateway or even a Wi-Fi hotspot or internet access, you only see part of the solution. The mix of all these together is also extremely dynamic. So when things are routed, they can be passed through different internet service providers. The use of zero trust networks and secure access service edge type technologies like Zscaler and Netscope also will depend on the performance of their proxy and their points of presence. So it becomes much more difficult to see how things are connected together. And if there's a fault in that, exactly where that might originate from. So one thing we'll do today in the remainder of the webinar is we'll take a look at those different paths and components and the ways that applications are being accessed from mobile and desktop devices in stores and other locations, and see what's required to be able to improve performance, optimize it proactively, and detect issues and resolve them quickly. Okay, so when we look at a more broad level, you could call the connectivity a form of hybrid connectivity because there's still a lot of mix of private connections, even as we're migrating towards the more SD-WAN and SASE-oriented solutions for security and direct internet access. And it's quite complex in a way because there's many different endpoints. There's applications that are in the cloud in many regions. So for example, you might host your own applications for retail in Azure East and Azure West or GCP or AWS. And you might have multiple regions, but on top of that, there's also multiple components, and a lot of SaaS and cloud applications need to talk to each other as well. And if you're relying on a SaaS application, let's say like Microsoft Teams for communication or WebEx, those also have different media servers distributed all over the country, and making sure that you have access to wherever those might be hosted, wherever you might be redirected, is quite important. There's a lot of dynamics in these multi microservice type hosting environments. Of course, in the network, there's new dimensions here too. There's a lot of encryption, of course, from the browser or the device directly to these SaaS and cloud applications. And that makes a lot of the traditional packet analysis type solutions less effective. In addition, there's a lot of distribution of the users, right? So they might not only just be in the store and distribution center and in the backstage and in the offices, they might also be delivering goods, taking the truck and delivering from the distribution center to the stores or bringing the orders to the customers. And this dynamic, very distributed user base is also complex to manage with any type of monitoring solution that's based on flow or data collection analytics. They're just too distributed to capture all that traffic, and it's not practical to install some sort of packet broker in every single store or location that's being serviced. Right, so this means in a way that you can use existing solutions to a point, but if you really want to see the end-to-end view of what's happening across the digital retailing infrastructure, you've got to take a different approach. It's more SaaS, mobile, and hybrid network centric. So that monitoring, this would look like something like this, where the key attributes of it are the ability to see the path from the store or from the mobile device across the Wi-Fi all the way through to where the applications are hosted. And those are typically fairly complex paths. And we'll take a look at why that's so essential. But one of the main reasons is that it's often easy to look at the first hop along the way, for example, the Wi-Fi in the store, and assume that's actually the weak point in this very long and complex chain. And in reality, what we find working with leading retailers is that although Wi-Fi can be a significant problem, it's also often blamed for a lot of application performance issues or digital experience issues that have nothing to do with that as a point of origin. So measuring the employee digital experience as well is fundamental, because that allows you to see whether or not things like network performance are actually impacting the users, or if it's just for example, poor Wi-Fi, but the application experience is actually very good. So understanding the correlation between these and between sites and applications and cloud locations is really essential to triangulating down to where the root cause is very quickly. And the other part of this is understanding how they all correlate together allows you to really collapse the effort required. If you know that it's not a network issue and it's coming from a certain host or it's coming from a particular SaaS or application vendor, you can talk to them directly with the evidence you need. He'll help them resolve the issue. If it's an internet issue with a particular provider, you can identify for them which router in their network is causing the problem and help them reroute the traffic or repair their internet connections themselves. But it allows you to really isolate faults quickly and then optimize the productivity of the employees. And it keeps the stores more online, faster cash, faster checkout, better inventory control, faster order fulfillment. All those things start to give a really serious digital edge to the providers and the retailers that are using this kind of technology. So we'll take a quick look at a retail example. We're working with the leading home improvement retailer in Europe called Leroy Merlin. So they have presence across about 250 stores in 14 countries. And have been working with Kadiska for about a year and a half now. And what they're trying to really solve is a problem as they introduced SD-WAN and SaaS applications and private cloud hosted applications, was the ability to make sure that every single store had low latency connectivity, high reliability, and the ability to make sure that the applications they're using on mobile and desktops in the stores and all the systems there would have impeccable connectivity, and anything goes wrong, they can resolve the problem within a few minutes. They also want to be able to collaborate with those third-party vendors to make sure that they understood if the problem is originating from, let's say, Google Cloud or a service provider, that they can work with them quickly to solve the problem. And this is one thing that they learned by looking at their existing tools before we had the chance to work with them, was that there was so many dimensions to their network, and they had plenty of tools on hand, but they were unable to see certain paths very effectively. So they could tell whether the Wi-Fi was good or bad, but they really didn't know much more than that, or which devices were trying to access specific applications. They also had some data from their SD-WAN vendor in terms of performance, but they couldn't see the underlays underneath, the ISPs that were serving them, and whether or not the routing was working effectively. So they had a limited visibility over those particular critical parts of the infrastructure. And then they had very little visibility at all when you start to look into the mobile side. So mobile devices might fall back onto a mobile network when they're outside the range of Wi-Fi. There's cloud network performance inside, let's say, Microsoft or Google that can create some long routing or delays or packet loss. And they also had real-time communication applications. They really didn't understand how the data was getting to them and why there might be calls dropped. So these were the important parts that they needed to improve visibility on. So by putting a different kind of view into that perspective of the operator, we were able to test directly from the Android devices themselves through the Wi-Fi all the way through to the applications they were using on the cloud and the software as a service applications. At the same time, you can see the Wi-Fi performance and see how the devices are roaming between different Wi-Fi SSIDs and hotspots, and see if that's actually an issue or not. So it's really about testing from the point of origin directly and then synthetically accessing the applications. From the other perspective, they wanted to be able to test between their clouds, between the applications they were using and integration with other applications. So be able to take a look at the network performance from the store to the cloud, but also from cloud to cloud and cloud to store. So in the other direction, if that was a critical element in making sure applications work properly. And this is really the idea, is to get a absolutely 100% view into every asset, location, and device performance. Because if you just don't have that full viewpoint, what ends up happening is it's very hard to correlate what's actually common to the faults that are impacting certain employees or certain devices or applications. By having a view across everything, you can immediately spotify some very powerful correlations. And by being able to do that, you can pinpoint where your resources should be focusing, which more advanced tools you might want to use to diagnose them in depth. So the ability to really improve the business performance and enhance the productivity was easy to measure with Leroy Merlin. In the end, they measured their mean time to resolve issues could be reduced quickly down to minutes from issues that were plaguing them for weeks or months that they had no ability to really understand what was causing the problems. And a lot of those were intermittent issues that typically manifest themselves in retail stores and look like potentially something that was originating from the device, when in fact it was usually coming from, let's say, the cloud hosting side. Let's give you a quick view of what it looks like from Kadiska's perspective when we do Wi-Fi monitoring in the store. We're not monitoring the Wi-Fi just for the purpose of seeing the signal strength, because there's plenty of tools that do that. It's really to be able to understand a couple of important things. Where were the devices? What were they connecting to when they were accessing specific key applications? And when you're trying to get through from the device out to those critical business applications, what is the entire path that they're taking, and where might there be a problem with the network connectivity? And from the example I'm showing here in the network routing diagrams and the path tracing we have in the bottom right, you can see that we can cover from the Wi-Fi's through to the LAN, through private connections, and through the multiple ISPs that might connect the store, and then all the way through into the cloud network. And I'll show you in a minute how you can see very quickly where the problem originates from. It might not be the network at all. Actually, if there's a problem with an application, it could easily be coming from a degradation in the server itself, or the response time of that, or some DNS routing. There's always a lot of flux and dynamics in these complex retail digital environments. So it's just an example of the ability to see the whole picture from end to end, so that you don't focus only on the places where you have the basic metrics. If you, for example, in this case, understood that the problem came from an internet provider that's redirecting traffic to the wrong region, then you can quickly have a discussion with them about how they're doing their routing, or change internet providers as a priority to make sure you're getting better low latency access to your applications. Okay. When you have those kind of point of views, there's multiple components that you have available to you to be able to see across the full infrastructure. Basically, what I showed you there, the path network performance from the store or the distribution center directly through to the application is one. But you also want to be able to know what the experience is of the user and which applications are performing well at a high level, so you can either proactively decide you want to optimize those and look into them, or you can be aware of the impact to the stores and the operations from a dashboard level. And you should also be able to see which stores are experiencing the issues on a map, so you can really pinpoint quickly why that's happening and what applications are potentially degrading. So this is the kind of visibility that a digital experience monitoring solution like Kadiska can offer you, where you test directly from the endpoints through all the different access points, the different security, SD-WAN, VPNs, and LAN networks into the SaaS and cloud hosted applications. The main strength of Kadiska, and the reason why it's been really valuable in retail applications especially, is that it's very simple to deploy. So there's not much time or available resources normally in the IT organizations or retail that have so many moving parts to actually bring on another tool and consider how to implement that, let alone learn how to use it and figure out the best way to solve problems with it. So Kadiska was really invented in a way that it could be deployed extremely rapidly. And then we use automated issue detection and automated root cause analysis and diagnostics to really simplify the job of the IT team, so they can quickly take that bird's eye view and take action on it. And the benefits are usually quite evident within just a few days, in terms of being able to streamline applications that may have been glitching or degrading for many months or even years, and finding those bottlenecks and trying to isolate them using the diagnostics that are available. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a very short example of Kadiska in action. And what we'll do here is take a look at an example that would reflect a retail environment. And the first thing you see when you come into Kadiska is that really high-level view of exactly how are people experiencing, as your employees, the different applications that you guys would need to get the job done. And in this case, you can also see the impact of how many users might be affected by it, and if the application performance has some sort of issue with it. And if I looked at some examples here, you can see like our own website. There's people around the world that are, or different locations that are having issues accessing And that might be, for an example, like an e-commerce system in a grocery chain or a pharmacy, and we can look down and see what the experience is of that from all over all the regions and get down to the individuals that are accessing it. On the other side of it, though, you can also see applications that are not performing well for internal users, like WebEx, for example. If that was used inside a store, you might be concerned about how that's being accessed, right? So if we go from that point of view, we can also get a quick look at how people are connecting into it. So how is your store connectivity functioning? Is everything working on the SD-WAN side? Are your ISPs underneath performing well? Are the secure gateways functioning? Are there any latency between different sites or different stores going to the applications you use? So you can get a quick view very quickly of what might be underlying any issues from the user and digital experience standpoint, how responsive the applications are, and which ones need attention from the IT team. Another thing you can look at, it, as I mentioned, is the network perspective. And when you're looking at the network side, so Kadiska can also look at the network performance for individual stores and locations such as distribution centers that will be accessing critical business applications for your retail operation. So in this case, what I'm looking at is a quick overview of accessing WebEx from different locations across North America. So it could be like pharmacies, or it might be your distribution or service and logistics centers, and understanding how employees are experiencing the latency and loss and so on that define the call quality. So if I take a look just at how we access the content delivery network, which is responsible for getting those calls connected and the media streaming going through them, this is what it would look like. And you can see certain sites have significantly more latency than others. So like a 91 millisecond latency would be enough to interrupt or drop a call. And you can also see by region which ones are actually having those issues. So if we wanted to look at that and figure out whether, for example, this was related to Wi-Fi or not, then we could go into the different fleets that we have that are testing those. So fleets would be like a particular store. If I took, for example, a store here in Montreal, where I'm working from, you can see how the devices have sometimes, all these different Android devices, they have a particularly high latency, and that's an indication that there might be something wrong either with the Wi-Fi or with the application server or the entire path in between. And we can look a little more quickly into those particular environments, and you'll see very quickly that the Wi-Fi is actually very good across the different SSIDs that these devices are connecting from. And there seems to be some higher latency. But if we look at that in detail, we would probably realize that it's not specifically the Wi-Fi that's causing that. And to understand that latency, this is the end-to-end latency, we'd have to go look at the entire path between that particular group of Android devices in the store and how they're experiencing the network, how they see the network all the way to the application. This is an example here of the network path that's calculated for the fleet of Android devices in the Montreal store to all the different WebEx CDN or hosts that could be hosting the calls. So it's changing over time as this one day of calls across the sites are all being placed. You're being redirected to different WebEx destinations for different calls or different devices, actually. To really understand this a little more clearly, we can see here that there's a variation also in the path length. So the path is changing as the day goes by. So we can take a look at, let's say, where the delay is showing up in this path. And we can see that there's an awful lot of delay in these routes and these servers here. And you might want to go and drill in and say what's happening at this particular location. But it's also easy to diagnose that automatically using the machine learning that we have built into Kadiska. In this case, what it tells you is there's specific nodes that are being impacted with high latency here. And this one is actually the issue. And in fact, it's in Sweden. That's the reason why it has a high latency. So it's a bit abnormal for a Montreal WebEx call to go through Sweden. Instead of the usual ones, they would probably route very close to the eastern side of the US, right? So by knowing that some of your calls are being redirected to completely different continents, this is the kind of thing you can have a conversation with WebEx and ask them how their particular CDN or their DNS resolution or their load balancing might result in this kind of extremely high latency to specific locations, which would impact all the call quality in that particular location. What's important about this particular kind of insight is that this is extremely common, not just to WebEx or Teams or Microsoft Office, but also to retail applications that might be hosted in the cloud or SaaS applications. And it's also important to note that the Wi-Fi link here that's connecting the devices has no latency really measurable. And the LAN, which is the next couple of hops before it hits the first internet gateway into the ISP, is also quite low latency. So there's no problem with the Wi-Fi in this case. There's no problem with the actual LAN, and there's no problem with the security and gateway and firewalls that are all indicated in the gray circles here. It's really all about what's happening out in the open internet and across the SD-WAN and different components that are being used across the network. And you can really collapse this down and make this a lot simpler as well. So you can look at just the different service providers along the way and understand if there's a problem with just one particular ISP, or if there's a problem like we saw before with a particular host. There is also another problem here you can see going into the particular, this is the Akamai network that's part of WebEx's CDN. This is resolving into the US, but there's still a very high latency on the handoff between Hurricane Electric ISP and the Akamai side. So this is another area that WebEx might want to look at and see if this is the right peering arrangement for them to bring in that kind of content. So I hope this shows you an example, a very simple one, of how sometimes the hypothesis when somebody calls the help desk and says, you know what, the Wi-Fi is not working, I can't pick my orders for online delivery, I can't communicate, or I can't use these specific inventory applications, or the cache is down and the point of sale terminal isn't working properly. A lot of the times it's much more important to take a step back and look at the end-to-end big picture so you can understand where you should focus your team and how you can have a really productive conversation with those vendors that you're working with. I want to thank you all for joining us. And if you want to put any questions or comments you have, anything you've seen today, whether it's just our experience and best practices we've seen from digital retailers, or if you're interested in trying the solution or learning more about it, let us know your comments and questions and we'll get back to you right away.